Let's take a look at the second question called biathlon. So, as usual, you always carefully read your question because questions is usually like the specific wording of a question is usually where people lose marks. So, they tell us a biathlon is a winter sport that involves skiing and shooting. The task below provide you with the projected shooting results for each sportsman and the projected speed for the penalty loops for each shooting. A white circle means that the target was shot and a black circle means that the target was missed. Okay, so for example, for Carlton over here, we see that he missed 3 shots, but he got 2 shots on the dot. Right. While calculating the race, assume that 1 shot takes 10 seconds. Okay, so no matter if the shot was, missed or on target, all of these took 10 seconds. So we can say 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10, 10, 10. So 50 seconds for shooting 1 and 50 for shooting 2. And then on top of that, 100 seconds in total, the penalty runs will come on top of that. So for every missed shot, so for every black circle, a player needs to run a penalty loop of 150 meters. Okay, so they will run a 150 meter loop, and their average speed is this 21.4, or the speed they give us. Okay, if all 5 targets were shot, then no penalty loops will need to be run. Okay, so for example, this person, Gary, all 5 targets was shot correctly, so there was no penalty loop, so there was no time. Okay, the speed is provided in kilometers per hour, like they give us here. However, all the answers in this case should be provided in seconds. Okay, so we will just need to convert that. How many seconds will each sportsman spend on the shooting ranges and on the penalty loops together? Round your answer to the nearest integer. Do not round any of the interim calculations. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to obviously begin with 100 seconds for each person and then calculate how many times did they run the 150 meter loop times with the speed, meaning the time it took them to run that loop. So to do this question, we need to know 3 formulas. The first formula is the if statement, and it's a very important formula when working with Excel. Okay, so in Excel, you can type words in, so you can type in apple and it will be seen as a word. Okay, if you want to type in a formula like in the previous example where we used XLOOKUP, you can't just type XLOOKUP because that is seen as a word. So to tell Excel we're using a formula, you start with an equal sign. After an equal sign, if you type any formula, you'll see it pops up and it assumes you want to type a formula. Okay, so if we go into formula mode and we say 1 equals 1, it will output something called true. Now, in that block, it doesn't have the word true because up here, you'll see that the block just contains 1 equal 1. This true just tells you that whatever was typed into that formula is right. Okay, if you go 1 equals 2, it will say false. Okay. This allows us to do a lot of cool things. So here's an example down here. We have a bunch of students. Here is their mark. So for each student, we want to know, did the student pass or fail the module? So I'm going to go into formula mode by saying equal. The student's mark is greater than or equal to 50, and it'll output true. So this true tells me the student passed. Okay, but having true or false here, it's not really that informative to someone who doesn't know Excel. Okay, so that is where the if statement comes in. We have a logical test, which is something that outputs true or false, right? And then you have to type in a value that it should output when it is true and a value when it is false. So let's try that out. If you go equal if open bracket, you'll see there's a logical test, value if true, value if false. So now in this case, what you can do is you can say if that thing, so just if that block, which in this case is true, comma, we will say the student pass, otherwise the student fail. And now if we drag this down, we can see which students pass and which students fail the exam. Okay, so usually you don't write this statement first. You will put this formula we wrote into your if statement. So you will say, if this block is equal to or greater than 50, then the student will pass, otherwise the student will fail. So that is typically how if statements work. An important thing to also see is that if a value is true or false, instead of outputting a word like we did here, we can output a number or, more importantly, a formula. So let's quickly take a look at that. Let's say we have a bunch of lists like 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, whatever. And here we have 0, 3, 4, 0, and 5. Okay, and what we wanted to do is to multiply this block with that block all the way down. This is the answer we want. But we don't want it to do that if this block says the word 0. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to say, if this block is equal to 0, comma, do nothing. So if I go open quotation, close quotation, it's just going to leave the block blank. If false, meaning if this block is not 0, then output this block times with that block, close bracket. So now if I drag this formula down, you'll see that it multiplies 3 with 3 by 3 is 9, 4 by 4 is 16. Because this is 0, it's not going to input anything, and 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, so in an if statement, you not only have to, you do your logical test, and then your output can be text or it can be a formula. The next formula is called COUNTIF. Okay, so here we have a bunch of cells. If we select all of the cells and we look down here, we'll see that there's a total of 15 cells. Okay, but we want to know how many of these cells says the word apple, and how many says banana, and how many says pear. Okay, so the formula you use is called COUNTIF. Okay, so it essentially says count how many is there in this range. So the first thing you select is a range. And the second thing is what criteria. And this is almost like that if statement we just did. The criteria is what should it count if that thing is in the cell. In this case, we want to count the word apple. And because it's a word, you have to put it in quotation marks. Okay. If we do this formula, it'll tell you there is 5 cells which contain the word apple. Okay. Let's say we had the students. We didn't want to know if the student, like the previous example, just passed or failed. We now have the student's letter grade, and we want to know how many students got a C. What we can now do is we can say, okay, count if in this range, how many C's are there? We see, okay, there are 2 students who got a C, and if we copy it down, just move this up 1 and make it a D. We see, and 4 students got a D in this class. Okay, so that is COUNTIF. It's a very common formula. The next one is round. Okay, so there is 3 round formulas. There's a round formula, a round up, and a round down formula. Let's just take a look at round. Okay, if I say round this number to 2 decimal places, it will say round 2.84 because it rounds it to 2 decimal places. Okay. Instead of saying 2, I'm going to say this yellow block, because now I can say round it to 2 decimal places or 3 decimal or 4 decimal places. If I say 0, it'll round it to the closest number, which in this case is 3. Okay. So both of these, 2.8 will be rounded up and 3.1 will be rounded down. Okay. In the case of round up, if I say equal round up, it'll take whatever number I want, round up. It'll take whatever value I have here, and I say round it please to the closest 0, and it will always round it up. So in this case, 3.14 is rounded up to 4, where in this case, it goes to the closest number. 3.14 goes down to 3. Round down also exists, round down, which essentially just rounds this number down to the nearest one. So 2.83 goes to 2. Okay. Now, in our case that we are currently doing, they are telling us round it to the nearest integer. Okay. So we can't use round down or round up. We should use the round function. Okay. So let's take a look at how we're going to do it. As usual, what I do with these types of questions is I use all this blank space on this side. Like Jason said, real estate in Excel is free. Okay, so if you need to use space, there is unlimited amount of blocks in Excel. Okay, don't try to save space. So let's use all the space on the left and we do our calculation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a 100. I'm going to say 100 seconds. Okay, because we're going to start with 100, because remember, all of them is going to spend 100 seconds just shooting targets. So I'm going to start with 100 seconds for all of them. Then I want to know missed. Okay, so let's make that bold. So if we take a look at this thing, Excel shows it to us as a white dot or a black dot. But if you actually go double click on it, you'll see a white dot contains the number 10. Okay, this one also contains the number 10, and the black block contains the number 0. Okay, so what I want in my missed is I want to count if this range is equal to the number 0. and then it will tell us 1. So it tells us that in shooting 1, this person missed 1 target. Okay, I'm going to just drag that to the next cell, but I'm going to move this. I'm just going to say, check again how many they missed, but in this one over here. And it's going to say 0. Okay, so now if I copy this down like that, okay, and let's just take a look at this one. This one says that in this block, we missed 4, and the answer is 4. All right, so our formula is currently working. We now know exactly how many shots the person missed. So at this point, we now know that they spent 100 seconds. Everyone spent 100 seconds shooting targets. Some people missed a few targets in the first round and in the second round. And for each one they missed, they need to run a 150-meter penalty loop, and they will run that penalty loop at that speed. So now I just need to do the math to calculate how fast, how much time did they spend running the marathon. So to calculate how much time the person spent running the penalty loops, it is a simple mathematical formula. And for this, I would really recommend doing your competition with a piece of paper in front of you. I always use a piece of paper if I quickly need to write something down or to figure something out, because remember, in a test environment, something that might seem basic to you will slip your memory because you are against time pressure. So having a piece of paper really helps you to just figure something out, like in this case, figuring out what my formula should be to calculate what my time in seconds would be using my distance and my kilometers. So here's a scan of sort of what I wrote down, and I now know I have to take 0.15, which is 150 meters, divided by the speed in kilometers per hour times with 3,600 to get the time in seconds. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go equal 0.15 0.15 divided by their speed. So I'm going to take this 21.4 for now. I'm going to put all of this in brackets for now and times that with 3,600. Okay, so that is how many seconds this person will run in shooting 1. What I now can simply do is say 1 times with that speed. But here's something we need to see, that shooting 1 and shooting 2 doesn't always have the same speed. You see, this person, Edison, ran 22.2 kilometers per hour for the first shooting, but they ran 24.2 for the second shooting. So we need to calculate here shooting 1 and shooting 2. Okay, so there would be a speed for shooting 1 and a speed for shooting 2. Okay, and shooting 2's speed will be the same formula, but we're just going to move our block over to this one. But now it throws an error. Okay, so an error, we can't really work with errors because it will mess up future formulas. So how you can get around this error is either by doing what we did in the previous video and using if error, or remember that what they told us here, where did they tell us? If all 5 targets were shot, then no penalty loops need to be run. So we can use our if statement that we calculated over here to do the same thing. So before we do this formula, we say if, open bracket, okay, if this one is more than 0, meaning there was more than 0 penalties, then do that formula, otherwise output 0. And if we copy that one across, and just remember to move this one up, then we see that instead of outputting an error now, it just outputs 0. Okay, so now what we have is we know we start with 100 seconds. Then we used our COUNTIF formula down here to count how many times the person missed a shot. Then we calculated, using this speed, how fast will they run a penalty shoot. And now what we're simply going to do is we're going to say they are going to run, lose 25 seconds for each one they run. So we're going to take that time multiplied with the total amount of penalties. Copy that across and copy that all the way down. So our answer is simply going to be the 100 seconds it takes them to actually shoot, plus with penalties for shooting 1 and penalties for shooting 2. That will be our final answer. Okay, but there's our final answers, and we see we have a bunch of errors down here. Okay, because even that says 125 and that says 125. But remember, they said round your answer to the nearest integer. So we're going to take this answer, we're going to wrap it in a round function, round it to 0, and then we get 125. 125 is what is there. It does say 125 over there, so we know we did everything correctly. We're going to copy it all the way down, and we're going to see that all our answers is now correct. Okay, so this question seemed difficult on the face, but if you just use your if statement, your COUNTIF statement, and your round functions, you would see that it is actually a very easy and simple question.